In 2007, Amanda Knox was accused of the murder of her housemate while studying abroad in Italy. The story attracted global attention and became a defining moment in Amanda's life. 10 years after being fully exonerated for the murder of Meredith Kercher, Amanda joins us now. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I have to say, your case was one that absolutely polarised the world. So much attention on it, and all stemmed from what you thought was an innocent trip abroad while you were studying to Italy.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I think that one of the biggest, criticisms of the case is that the truth of what happened to my roommate Meredith got lost in all of the scandal around it. And, one of my biggest traumas that I've had to deal with ever since even being acquitted and recognized as innocent is reckoning with the fact that my very identity, who I am, is wrapped up and inextricably linked with the death of my friend.
Language and the rich tapestry of its culture. The rolling hills of Tuscany, the ancient architecture of Rome, the melodic cadence of Italian conversation, all of it captured her imagination in a way that would ultimately lead her to that fateful autumn in Perugia. By 2007, Meredith was a student at the University of Leeds, pursuing European politics and Italian. She was the kind of young woman who lit up a room when she entered, always running late but never lacking in enthusiasm. Her friends described her as someone who could make even the most ordinary day feel like an adventure. She had that rare gift of making everyone around her feel special, remembered, important. Her laugh was infectious, her smile genuine, and her dreams as big as the world she was eager to explore. When the opportunity came to study abroad in Perugia as part of her university program, Meredith didn't hesitate for a moment. Italy called to her like a siren song, promising new experiences, deeper knowledge of the language she loved, and the chance to immerse herself in a culture that had fascinated her since childhood. She packed her bags with the excitement of someone embarking on the greatest adventure of her life, telling her family and friends that this would be her chance to truly live, to discover who she was meant to become in a country that felt like home even before she arrived. Perugia itself was a city made for dreamers like Meredith. Built on an Etruscan foundation and later conquered by the Romans, its narrow streets wound their way up the hillside like ancient serpents, connecting past and present in a maze of medieval architecture and Renaissance beauty. The University for Foreigners, where international students came to study Italian language and culture, sat like a jewel in the crown of this historic city. Students from around the world walked these same streets that had been traveled by saints and scholars, artists and poets, for over 2,000 years. It was in this magical setting that Meredith met her roommates in the cottage at Via della Pergola 7. The house itself was nothing spectacular, a modest two-story building with cream-colored walls and green shutters, tucked away in a quiet residential area just outside the city center. But for the young women who lived there, it represented something precious: independence, friendship, and the exciting possibility of new beginnings in a foreign land. Among her roommates was Amanda Knox, a 20-year-old American student from Seattle, Washington. Where Meredith was reserved and thoughtful, Amanda was bold and outgoing. Where Meredith moved through the world with careful consideration, Amanda seemed to dance through life with a carefree spirit that some found charming and others found unsettling. The two young women came from different worlds, Meredith from the structured propriety of British middle-class life, Amanda from the laid-back Pacific Northwest culture of the American West Coast. Amanda had grown up in a divorced household, splitting her time between her mother Etta Mellis and her father Kurt Knox. She was athletic, playing soccer and engaging in various sports throughout her high school years at Seattle Preparatory School. Her teachers remembered her as bright and capable, though sometimes prone to speaking without thinking, a trait that would later prove to have devastating consequences. She had chosen to study abroad in Italy partly to improve her Italian language skills and partly because, like so many young Americans, she was drawn to the romance and beauty of European culture. The two roommates got along well enough in those first weeks of autumn 2007, though they moved in different social circles. Meredith was more studious, often found with her nose buried in books, working diligently on her thesis about the European Union's approach to combating violence against women, a topic that would later seem hauntingly prophetic. She made friends easily but chose them carefully, preferring deep conversations over small talk, meaningful connections over superficial socializing. Amanda, by contrast, threw herself into the social scene with characteristic enthusiasm. She held a part-time job at a bar called Le Chic, where she worked serving drinks to locals and tourists alike. The job suited her outgoing personality, and she quickly became known among the regular customers for her friendly demeanor and willingness to practice her Italian with anyone who would listen. She made mistakes, grammatical errors that sometimes led to unintentional humor, but she laughed them off with the resilience of someone unafraid to fail in pursuit of learning. It was through this social whirlwind that Amanda's path crossed with that of Rafael Salicito on October 25, 2007. Knox met Rafael Salicito, a 23-year-old software engineering student, at a concert that she had attended with Meredith. Rafael was everything that might appeal to a young American woman studying abroad, handsome in that distinctly Italian way, intelligent, and possessing the kind of old-world charm that seemed to come naturally to European men, often characterized as young love. Amanda found herself drawn to Raphael's gentle nature and quiet intelligence, while he was captivated by her American boldness and infectious energy. They would later describe to investigators how they spent their time together, cooking meals, watching movies, talking late into the night about their dreams and aspirations. Knox began spending her time at his flat, a 5-minute walk from Via della Pergola 7, often staying overnight and returning to her cottage in the morning to change clothes and check on things. This pattern would become crucial to the events that followed, as it meant that Amanda was not always present at the cottage, creating gaps in the timeline that would later be scrutinized by investigators and lawyers with microscopic intensity. Meanwhile, Meredith was building her own life in Perugia, though in a more cautious and deliberate way than her American roommate. She had made friends among the British students in the program, young women who shared her love of literature and serious conversation. She was working on improving her Italian through formal classes and informal practice, taking pride in her growing fluency and cultural understanding. Her days were structured around her studies, her evenings often spent reading or socializing with her close circle of friends. Those who knew Meredith during her time in Perugia would later describe a young woman who seemed to be flourishing in the Italian environment. She loved the pace of life, the emphasis on savoring meals and conversations, the way that history seemed to live and breathe in every stone of the ancient city. She would call her family regularly, sharing stories of her adventures and expressing how much she was learning, not just about the Italian language and culture, but about herself. But there was another presence lurking at the edges of this idyllic student life, someone whose path would intersect with both Meredith and Amanda in ways that would prove devastating. Rudy Herman Guide was a 20-year-old man originally from the Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa, who had been adopted as a child and brought to Italy. His life had been marked by instability and petty crime, a sharp contrast to the privileged backgrounds of the university students whose world he would violently enter. Rudy had grown up in the system, moving between foster families and institutions, never quite finding the stability and belonging that every child needs. By 2007, he was living on the margins of Perugia's society, occasionally employed in odd jobs but more often surviving through small-time criminal activities. He had been arrested multiple times for petty theft and burglary, developing a pattern of breaking into homes and stealing whatever he could find. The police knew him, but he had never been involved in anything approaching the level of violence that would soon erupt. What made Rudy's presence particularly chilling was how he had managed to insert himself into the social circles frequented by the international students. He was known to hang around the bars and clubs where young people gathered, sometimes charming his way into conversations and social situations where he didn't belong. Some of the students, including both Meredith and Amanda, had encountered him casually at parties or social gatherings, though neither considered him a friend or someone they knew well. November 1, 2007, was All Saints' Day, a public holiday in Italy when many businesses closed and people gathered with family or friends to honor the memory of the dead. It was a day that should have been peaceful and reflective, but instead it would become the date that changed everything for everyone involved. The weather was crisp and cool, with the kind of autumn chill that made people want to stay inside with warm drinks and good company. Amanda spent most of that day and evening with Raphael at his apartment. They had been together for just over a week, still in that honeymoon phase of new romance where every moment together felt precious and exciting. According to their later testimony, they spent the evening smoking marijuana, cooking dinner, and watching a movie on Raphael's computer. It was, by all accounts, a quiet and intimate evening between two young people falling in love. Meredith, meanwhile, had plans with her British friends. She joined them for dinner at a friend's house, enjoying the kind of evening that had become precious to her during her time in Perugia: good food, meaningful conversation, and the warm camaraderie of friendship in a foreign land. She was in good spirits, laughing and talking about her studies, her plans for the weekend, her growing confidence in speaking Italian. Those who saw her that evening would later remember her as being happy and relaxed, showing no signs of fear or concern about anything. The evening proceeded normally for everyone involved. Amanda and Raphael, according to their accounts, fell asleep together at his apartment after their quiet night in. Meredith returned to the cottage at Via della Pergola around 9 p.m. after saying goodbye to her friends with hugs and promises to see them soon. She entered her home, probably thinking about the essay she needed to finish, the phone call she wanted to make to her family, or simply looking forward to a good night's sleep. The forensic experts would later determine that she had also suffered other injuries, evidence of sexual assault, and that she had likely lived for several minutes after the attack, slowly bleeding to death in her own room. The scene that greeted investigators was one of controlled chaos. Meredith's room showed signs of a struggle, with blood spattered on the walls and floor. Her personal belongings were scattered, and there was evidence that someone had tried to stage the scene to look like a burglary gone wrong. A window had been broken, supposedly indicating that someone had entered through it, though this would later become a point of controversy in the investigation. But perhaps the most damning evidence was what Rudy Guede had left behind. His bloody palm print was discovered at the crime scene, and fingerprints found in Kercher's bedroom matched Rudy Guede. His DNA was found on Meredith's body and throughout the crime scene, creating an unshakable forensic link between him and the murder. When investigators tried to locate him for questioning, they discovered that he had fled Italy, eventually being arrested in Germany trying to board a train without a ticket. However, the investigation took a turn that would prove to be one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. Instead of focusing solely on Rudy Guede, whose physical evidence at the scene was overwhelming, investigators became convinced that the murder had been committed by multiple people working together. Their suspicions fell on Amanda Knox and Raphael Salcedo, based on what they perceived as inconsistencies in their stories and suspicious behavior in the days following the discovery of Meredith's body. The morning of November 2, 2007, would be seared into Amanda's memory forever. She returned to Via della Pergola 7 on the morning of November 2, 2007. She found the front door open. Drops of blood were in the bathroom that she shared with Kercher. Kercher's bedroom door was locked, and Amanda later testified that she assumed Meredith was still sleeping. But as she moved through the cottage, gathering clean clothes for another night at Raphael's apartment, she began to notice things that seemed wrong. The front door being open was unusual. The girls were careful about security, especially since they were foreign students living in what was, despite its beauty, still an unfamiliar place. Drops of blood were in the bathroom that she shared with Kercher, which Amanda initially thought might be from ear piercings or some minor injury. But as she continued to look around, she found more blood, and a growing sense of unease began to settle over her. Amanda later testified that she tried calling Meredith's cell phones, both her Italian phone and her British phone, but got no answer. She returned to Raphael's apartment and told him what she had found. Together, they decided to go back to the cottage to investigate further and possibly contact the authorities. This decision would prove to be a crucial moment in the case, as their behavior over the next few hours would be interpreted by investigators as evidence of guilt rather than concern. When Amanda and Raphael arrived back at the cottage, they were joined by the postal police, who had come to the house because Meredith's British cell phone had been found discarded in a garden nearby. The officers found it strange that Amanda and Raphael were at the house when they had expected to find only Italian students, and their questions began to focus on the young couple's relationship to Meredith and their whereabouts the previous evening. It was then that the awful discovery was made. Kercher's bedroom door was locked, and when the police finally broke it down, they found Meredith's body lying beneath the duvet, her life brutally ended in what should have been the safety of her own room. The scene was horrific, and everyone present, Amanda, Raphael, the police officers, and the other roommates who had arrived, was deeply shaken by what they witnessed. Amanda's reaction to the discovery of Meredith's body would become one of the most controversial and analyzed aspects of the entire case. While others cried and appeared shocked, Amanda was observed by the police officers as being unusually calm and detached. She and Raphael were seen embracing and kissing outside the cottage while the crime scene was being processed, behavior that the investigators found inappropriate and suspicious given the circumstances. But was this evidence of guilt, or simply the reaction of a young woman in shock, processing tragedy in her own way? Amanda would later explain that she had always dealt with stress and trauma through a kind of emotional numbing, that her apparent calmness was actually a defense mechanism that kicked in when she was overwhelmed. She pointed out that people react to tragedy in different ways, and that judging someone's innocence or guilt based on their emotional responses was fundamentally unfair. The investigation that followed would become a study in how cultural differences, language barriers, and preconceived notions can derail the pursuit of justice. Amanda and Raphael were taken to the police station for questioning, initially as witnesses who might have information about Meredith's final hours. But as the hours stretched into days, and as their stories were examined and re-examined by investigators, they gradually shifted from witnesses to suspects. Hughes, an innocent man, demonstrated a callous disregard for the truth and suggested that she was capable of the kind of calculated deception that would be necessary to commit murder and cover it up. Meanwhile, Raphael found himself caught in a web of suspicion, partly due to his association with Amanda and partly due to what investigators saw as inconsistencies in his own account of the evening. He had initially supported Amanda's version of events, confirming that they had spent the night together at his apartment. But under intense questioning, some details of his story began to shift, creating the kind of small contradictions that investigators interpreted as evidence of deception. The media attention surrounding the case was unprecedented and overwhelming. The story had everything that makes for compelling headlines: young, attractive suspects, an international setting, questions of sex and violence, and cultural clashes between American and Italian approaches to justice. Amanda, in particular, became a media sensation, with her photograph appearing on newspaper front pages and magazine covers around the world. The Italian press, in particular, seemed fascinated by Amanda's personality and background. They portrayed her alternately as an innocent abroad caught up in circumstances beyond her control, or as a cold-blooded killer hiding behind a facade of youthful innocence. Nicknames like Foxy Knoxy, a reference to her childhood soccer nickname, appeared in headlines, reducing a complex legal case to sensationalized caricatures. The forensic evidence in the case was both crucial and controversial. Prosecutors advanced a single piece of forensic evidence linking Salcedo to Kercher's bedroom, where the murder had taken place, fragments of his DNA on Kercher's bra clasp. This evidence was found weeks after the initial crime scene investigation, when investigators returned to collect additional materials. The defense argued that the DNA evidence was unreliable due to potential contamination and the length of time that had passed since the murder. For Amanda, the forensic evidence was even more problematic for the prosecution. Despite extensive testing of the crime scene, investigators found no physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, no blood that definitively placed her in Meredith's bedroom during the time of the murder. The prosecution's case against her relied heavily on what they characterized as suspicious behavior, inconsistent statements, and the theory that the murder had been committed by multiple attackers working together. The trials that followed were a media circus that played out over several years, with appeals, reversals, and retrials that kept the case in the international spotlight long after Meredith's death. Amanda and Raphael were initially convicted of murder in 2009 and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Amanda received 26 years in prison, while Raphael was sentenced to 25 years. The verdicts were celebrated by some as justice for Meredith, while others saw them as the result of a flawed investigation and cultural prejudices. But the legal saga was far from over. In 2011, an appeals court overturned the convictions, finding that the forensic evidence was insufficient and that the original investigation had been marred by serious errors. Amanda and Raphael were released from prison after serving nearly 4 years, and they returned to their home countries to try to rebuild their lives. The relief was short-lived, however. In 2013, Italy's highest court overturned the acquittals and ordered a new trial, finding that the appeals court had not properly considered all the evidence. Amanda, who had returned to the United States, refused to return to Italy for the new trial, while Raphael remained in Italy and participated in the proceedings. In 2014, they were again convicted of murder, with Amanda receiving a sentence of 28 years and Raphael 25 years. Finally, in March 2015, Italy's highest court definitively acquitted both Amanda and Raphael of the murder charges, bringing an end to the legal proceedings that had consumed nearly 8 years of their lives. Amanda Knox and Raphael Salcedo were exonerated in March 2015. The court found that the evidence against them was insufficient to support a conviction, and that the prosecution's theory of a group attack was not supported by the forensic evidence. Throughout all of these legal proceedings, Rudy Gied's role in the murder was never in doubt. He was tried separately and convicted of murder and sexual assault in 2008, receiving a sentence of 30 years in prison that was later reduced to 16 years. His physical evidence at the crime scene was overwhelming, and he eventually admitted to being present during Meredith's death, though he continued to claim that he was not responsible for her murder. He became a suspect in the murder of Meredith Kercher investigation after his bloody palm print was discovered at the crime scene, and the forensic evidence against him was far stronger than anything that connected Amanda or Raphael to the actual murder. Yet somehow, the investigation had become focused on the young couple rather than the man whose DNA and fingerprints were found throughout the crime scene. in compensation for wrongful imprisonment after spending nearly 4 years in jail. The case has had lasting implications for how international crimes are investigated and prosecuted, and for how the media covers high-profile criminal cases. It highlighted the dangers of allowing cultural preconceptions and sensationalized media coverage to influence criminal investigations, and the importance of basing prosecutions on solid forensic evidence rather than theories about suspicious behavior or character judgments. For many observers, the Amanda Knox case represents a cautionary tale about the intersection of justice, media, and cultural differences. It shows how easily a criminal investigation can be derailed by preconceived notions about how innocent people should behave, and how the pursuit of a compelling narrative can sometimes overshadow the careful evaluation of evidence. Today, Amanda lives quietly in the United States, where she has married and started a family. She has written a book about her experience and occasionally speaks about criminal justice reform, but she largely tries to stay out of the public eye. The woman who was once one of the most famous faces in the world now values her privacy above almost everything else, understanding better than most how quickly fame can turn into infamy. Raphael has also attempted to move forward with his life, though the shadow of the case continues to follow him. He has written about his experiences and spoken about the need for reform in how criminal investigations are conducted, particularly when they involve international suspects and complex cultural dynamics. Rudy Gied was released from prison in November 2021 after serving 13 years of his sentence. His release sparked fresh controversy and pain for Meredith's family, who felt that he had not served enough time for the brutal murder of their daughter. For Amanda, his release was a reminder of the ongoing injustice she feels was done not only to her and Raphael, but to the memory of Meredith herself. The cottage at Via della Pergola 7 still stands in Perugia, though it no longer houses international students. The city itself continues to attract young people from around the world who come to study Italian language and culture, just as Meredith had in that autumn of 2007. But for those who remember the case, it serves as a reminder of how quickly dreams can turn into nightmares, and how the pursuit of justice can sometimes lead us astray. In the end, the Amanda Knox case remains a complex and troubling chapter in the annals of criminal justice. It raises difficult questions about guilt and innocence, about the nature of evidence and the role of cultural bias in criminal investigations. It reminds us that behind every headline and every legal verdict are real people whose lives have been forever changed by tragedy and its aftermath. Meredith Kercher was a young woman with hopes and dreams, a loving family, and a bright future ahead of her. She deserved to live that life, to fulfill those dreams, to experience all the joy and love that should have been hers. Instead, her life was cut short in the most violent way possible, and her memory has been overshadowed by years of legal proceedings and media spectacle. For Amanda Knox and Raphael Salcedo, the case represents years of their lives lost to imprisonment and legal battles, reputations forever tainted by accusations that were ultimately not proven in court. Whether one believes in their innocence or guilt, there is no denying that they paid a heavy price for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and for becoming entangled in an investigation that seemed to lose sight of its primary purpose: finding the truth about what happened to Meredith Kercher on that terrible night in November 2007. The truth, as it often does in such cases, remains elusive and complicated. What we know for certain is that a beautiful young woman lost her life, that families were destroyed by grief and controversy, and that the pursuit of justice became entangled with cultural prejudices, media sensationalism, and the very human tendency to seek simple answers to complex questions. As the years pass and the immediate intensity of the case fades from public memory, perhaps we can hope that the lessons learned from this tragedy will help prevent similar miscarriages of justice in the future. And perhaps, most importantly, we can remember Meredith Kercher not just as a victim of a brutal crime, but as a young woman who deserved so much more than the fate that befell her in that ancient Italian city where she had gone to pursue her dreams.